Hi everybody, we're back and we're going to be discussing Chapter 4. In Chapter 4 we're going to talk about love, intimacy, and sexual communication. Let's start with how we establish early intimacy. How do we go from strangers to friendship, or from strangers to indicating our romantic interest? I mentioned friendship because a lot of the same principles that drive romantic attraction drive friendships and even hiring decisions and things like that. So there's a lot of overlap between what we're saying, what I'm going to be talking about today, and other things that have nothing to do with romance, but have everything to do with relationships. So, establishing early intimacy. Well, I thought it was important to clarify that I'm talking about more than romance, because it doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're potentially going to enter into with a person. One of the first things we consider is physical attractiveness. This sounds really shallow. It makes us sound like we judge people based on appearance in a sort of mean way. But the thing is, we do it unconsciously and automatically. One of the aspects of physical attractiveness is that we have a tendency to display what's called the beautiful is better bias. What that means is that when we meet someone who is good looking, we assume that they have other good traits that go along with their physical attractiveness. So on average, people who are judged as physically attractive by raters are also are assumed to be, without even having met the person. All you've seen is pictures of them. They are judged or assumed to be nicer, more successful, friendlier, smarter, more successful. Like, all sorts of good things are assumed just because a person is good looking. So when you have physical attractiveness, you get sort of a little bit of a boost in people's initial assumptions. It makes people more willing to want to know you. Now, of course, there are limits to this, right? Because if a person is physically attractive, we assume good things. But if you have a person who is, I'm trying to think of a word that wouldn't sound offensive. A person who is good looking because it's clear that they've augmented or used enhancements to make them look better. It makes people actually suspicious of them. So it's not like more and more and more beauty is associated with more and more good other characteristics. There's like this sweet spot of being basically average with a general sense of good health. It's hard to say exactly what we're cueing on. We'll get back to this later and it'll make more sense. So we assume people who are good looking have characteristics that we might like. And then we also tend to look for people who are about our equal in physical attractiveness. Now, if you look at our modules, I have a link to a video about the matching hypothesis, and it actually shows you how the matching hypothesis actually manifests itself with people who aren't judging each other for attractiveness, but instead are matching up based on the numbers that are stuck to their foreheads. So each person can't see their own number on their forehead, but everybody else can see the number that's on their forehead. So knowing that you have a number on your own forehead, you approach other people and try and match up. And what happens in these studies is that people who have ones on their foreheads tend to find each other and match up, and people who have fives on their forehead tend to find each other and match up. We tend to find people who are about our equal in attractiveness. And if you look around at most couples who you know, especially longer term couples that you know, usually they're about equivalent in attractiveness. Now, you of course know of couples where there's a real disparity between the appearance of one and the appearance of the other. And you know that probably the one who isn't as physically attractive probably brings something else to the relationship. Now, the jaded ones among you are thinking, oh yeah, probably wealth. And it might be. That might be the thing that compensates for not being as good looking. It could also be being really smart. It could be being really successful, even if that doesn't mean money, but it means power or status. Those things can compensate for lack of physical attractiveness. So you might have a very attractive partner paired up with a very successful partner, and so they actually are ending up balancing each other out on their general value to other potential partners. So that's what we're talking about. We find people who match us physically and in other ways. Now, this is from a poll of Zoosk online dating site members. So this is not a scientific study. They asked people who belong to this online dating site that I had never heard of before. So that kind of might imply it's not, something that everybody belongs to. Of course, I've been married forever, so it's not like I would have been finding online dating sites anyway, but I have heard of other ones. So we'll just take these with a little bit of grain of salt. But they asked people what the most important qualities were in somebody who they were going to date for the first time. And 25% of the females and 28% of the males said physical attractiveness was the most important quality on a first date. So I'm going to leave that up on the side because it's going to stay there, and I'm going to add some other things because, of course, physical attractiveness is not the only thing that we consider, thank goodness. We consider other things like proximity. Proximity refers to how close we are to that person. The one thing that's a really interesting psychological factor is that even if we didn't initially find somebody attractive, or we wouldn't have stopped to get to know them normally, if we are merely exposed to them, like we keep seeing them on the bus on our way to school, or they're in one of our classes, or they live in our neighborhood, and so we keep seeing them, they actually oftentimes will grow on us, and they'll start to actually become more attractive in our eyes. That's what we call the mere exposure effect. So by just being around somebody, and if you think about it, a lot of people who you pass on the street or you see at the grocery store, you wouldn't even get a chance to know them. Because, who stops and really starts talking to strangers and really tries to get to know somebody who they have not really been exposed to much? Having access to somebody makes it more likely that you'll reach out, get to know them, and start the beginnings of a relationship with them. If you do find somebody attractive and you start to talk, and maybe dance with them at a club or something, and then you find out that they live, an hour away from you, right? Just finding out that you're not going to have good access to each other oftentimes will cause your interest to sort of decline. One of the things that we all sort of believe is that in order for a relationship to grow well, you have to have lots of day-to-day access to each other. So proximity is really an important thing for most of us. Similarity is another really important thing. This kind of, relates to the matching hypothesis, right? Because we're interested in people who are similar to us in appearance. But we also are interested in people who are similar to us in way more basic values. Like in this Zoosk poll, they asked about similar interests. And you'll notice that, it's not the top of the list for males or for females, but it made the list. They are looking for somebody who shares similar interests. And a lot of times when we first want to get to know somebody, one of the ways that we'll have a lot of exposure to them is if we share interests and we belong to the same groups, or we want to participate in the same activities and things like that. If you maybe are interested in somebody and then you say, hey, why don't we go do this activity that I enjoy? Let's go jogging. And they say, I don't like to jog. And then you say, well, hey, my friend and I were going to go down to the waterfront. Do you want to go with us? I really don't like going downtown. Right? If everything that you suggest, they're like, I really don't like that. You start to realize we might not be a match. You don't like this music? Oh no. That can be a deal breaker for friendships, right? If you find out that this potential friend does not like the same music you like, that can be a deal breaker. So similarity on interests, on taste, similarity on background, what kind of family you came from, how much income your family had growing up, things like political values, these kinds of similarities, matching on race, matching on age, matching on level of education. These are factors that a lot of times foster the development of friendships and the development of romantic relationships. Flirting with each other is another big step in establishing early intimacy in romantic relationships, kind of in friendships, but not the same way. I mean, usually we aren't batting our eyes at a potential friend, but we look at them longer. We do that with romantic targets too, don't we? We look at them longer than we would look at somebody who we're not interested in spending time with. Okay, now flirting has a whole series of behaviors, and they are sex specific. We have, for females who are interested in someone romantically, they will maintain eye contact just a hint too long. Now, it's natural. Men, on average, maintain eye contact longer than women all the time. So it's harder to tell that a man is flirting by eye contact because men maintain eye contact to such an extent that it's oftentimes referred to as staring. So it's kind of hard to tell with a man. But with a woman, maintaining eye contact longer is a sign of interest. A lot of times men feel like they initiated contact with a woman when in fact they were beckoned over by a woman who maintained eye contact longer than normal. And then the man thought, okay, I'm going to go see that woman. And in fact, she had said, hey, come over here with her eye contact. So eye contact is one of the early flirting behaviors that women will engage in. Then there are other things that are very sex typed. You see, on average, women, when they are flirting, they'll throw their heads back, sort of exposing their necks. They'll throw their heads back while laughing or to toss their hair back. So they expose their necks. They touch themselves. They'll put their hand on their neck. They'll put their hand in their hair. They'll put their hand on their own leg. They'll put their hand on their own upper arm. Things like that. Those are signs of flirtation in women. Now, touching your own upper arm is a fine line between that and then crossing your arms. A woman who crosses her arms across her chest is not interested. They're, in fact, putting up a barrier. So, I mean, there's a fine line between touching yourself and actually making a barrier between you and the person who's approaching you. So, tossing your head back, touching yourself, laughing, those are all signs of flirtation in women. And then in men, on average, when they're flirting, what their behaviors generally do is make them bigger. So they'll put their hands on their hips, or they'll put their arm over the back of the seat that they're sitting in so that their chest is broader. They'll talk louder. They will look around a lot. That oftentimes is them making sure that no one else is trying to come take their place. They'll lean in towards the target of their interest. So there are some really common male behaviors and really common female behaviors that we see in flirting. Those are actually some really good things to know if you're single and you're looking. If you can master the signs of flirting in the people that you're interested in, that it could be a huge advantage in dating. Another factor in establishing early intimacy, it sounds very 8th grade, but knowing that the other person likes you makes them more interesting to you. You know, remember when you were 14 and somebody came and told you, oh, so-and-so likes you, and you're like, what? Then you give that person a second look. You might not have been interested in them until you found out that they were interested in you. So even as adults, I mean, of course, it just opens you up more to know that that hurdle has already been crossed, that they're already interested in you. So if somebody else starts showing interest, you may give them a second look, spend more time with them, give them an opportunity to reveal their similarities with you, show you signs of flirting, stuff like that. Other things that were on the Zusk poll were things like good sense of humor, and you'll notice that that was slightly more important for women respondents in their first dates than for male respondents. And on average, women mean something different by good sense of humor than men do. Women mean that their romantic partner has a good sense of humor that can make them laugh. And for men, what they mean by good sense of humor is that their romantic partner gets their jokes. So males tend to think that they should be the one to make their partner laugh, and women tend to think that they're the ones who should be laughing, made to laugh. So kind of an interesting sex difference on that. Intellectual connection, again, the males and females almost matched on how important this was, just like they did on similar interests. And then confidence. It's interesting because women rated that lower than men, and I think it's because they mean kind of something different to each other. For men, confidence means that the romantic partner doesn't need a lot of reassurances, that the romantic partner feels good in their skin, and it makes the male partner feel like this is a person who's not going to be insecure. For the female partner, when they say that they're interested in confidence, they're oftentimes referring to like cockiness, and cockiness is not that attractive to women. So if the woman meant cockiness when they said confidence, then yeah, they'd rate that fairly low. They don't want a cocky partner. But if they had meant something more like self-assurance, then females might have agreed with it more. So this is one of those downsides of polls that I talked about in chapter 2. That wait, I think that was chapter 1. Sorry. The way that the survey is worded can affect the answers that the respondents give. That's for sure. All right, I'm going to go over Sternberg's triangular theory of love, and then we'll finish this segment. So let's go over this theory. Okay, so Robert Sternberg was originally a researcher in the area of intelligence, and he still is. It's a really tough area to do research because people have a lot of opinions about intelligence testing and things like that. Well, he became a rising star in the area of intelligence as he developed, interestingly enough, Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. Oh, triarchic and triangular. I think Robert Sternberg has a fixation on threes, I'm going to say. So he became this big rising star. He was a professor at Harvard. I think he still is. I shouldn't say he was. I think he still is. But here, as he's this rising star, he's flying all over the world, giving talks on his new conception of intelligence. His wife was growing more and more dissatisfied in their relationship, and he thought everything was fine because he'd come home from his trips, and he sometimes would take her with him, but once they had kids, it became really kind of cumbersome to do that. So he'd come home, he'd be all pumped up, they'd have sex frequently. He felt like everything was fine. He didn't understand. He had no clue. Like, she would try and tell him that she was dissatisfied, and he really didn't understand this. You might wonder how I know so many details. I attended a talk that he gave when he was explaining how he came into this field of research. So one day, in his opinion, she just out of nowhere asked for a divorce, and he was just blown away. He had no idea this was coming. He literally had no idea. But then as he did some self-reflection and they talked about it more, and he regretted that he lost her and these kinds of things, he actually developed a theory to account for how he could have so desperately missed what she really needed. So bring in the triangle, right? Because everything Sternberg does is in a triangle. All right, so here's his theory. He says there are 3 possible components to any relationship. There's the intimacy issue, and I very deliberately picked a picture of people talking because he means the emotional connection, the sharing of hopes and dreams and fears and all the things that one shares with somebody who one is intimate with, who has an emotional intimacy. There's another component, which is commitment, and I put a little house with hearts inside there because he meant by commitment, he literally meant getting married. I think in more modern times, he designed this theory back in the late 80s. In more modern times, I think he might include people moving in together, but I don't know, because he thought what was really important about the commitment is that declaration in front of everybody that this is my chosen one, and this is the person who I plan to be with for the rest of my life. And then there's passion, and I found a nice burning heart, because passion is what you think passion is. Now, of course, for Sternberg, he, being male, thought that passion was intimacy. One of the big difficulties between males and females in romantic relationships is that for men to become emotionally intimate, they have to first feel their passion has been satisfied. Like they can't be vulnerable emotionally until they have connected passionately. And for women, on average, the order is reversed. They can't really feel passionately unless they have shared emotional intimacy. And so what can be very satisfying for a man can be dissatisfying for a woman oftentimes. And so Sternberg's focus on the fact that they were having regular sex and everything seemed fine from his perspective, it took his wife leaving him for him to realize how important the emotional intimacy was for her and how much he'd really been ignoring that. So he developed this theory that, okay, you have these three components. If they're all missing, he would call that non-love. Non-love is what you feel for a complete and total stranger on the street that you don't even glance at. That's non-love. Okay, so let's get into actual people that you might know. If all you have is intimacy, where you talk about things, you share secrets, you know, have a lot of shared interests, stuff like that, he'd say you are experiencing a relationship called liking. You might call it friendship. If all you have is a commitment, so let's say you got married and there's no intimacy or passion, he'd call that empty love. He thought at the time he wrote this, he thought the only way to be in empty love was to have been in a love that had the other components, but somehow those faded away over time and all you were left with was the commitment. But of course there are other ways to enter that, like for example an arranged marriage, which is common in other parts of the world, where you make the commitment and then the assumption is that the intimacy and the passion will grow from there. So empty love can be the beginning or it could be the end of a relationship. And then if all you have is passion, then you have infatuation. This is what, teenage girls feel for insert modern boy band here. I'll reveal my age by saying, back when I was a kid, I had an infatuation with David Cassidy. We were totally going to get married. Of course, I didn't know him. I just saw him on TV and, of course, was all nothing but preteen passion for the guy. That's infatuation. Now, where it starts getting interesting is if you start combining things. Like if you combine if you combine intimacy and commitment, then you can develop what's called companionate love. So this is common in, it's sort of our stereotype of older couples. We kind of assume maybe the passion has died and then all they have is intimacy and commitment. That's a stereotype and probably isn't true for all couples, but it's also something that if we're gonna be really generous in our definition of commitment, it's kind of the kind of relationship that women often have with each other, with like their best friend. All the other friends know that yes, we're all friends, but us two, we're best friends, and I would do anything for you, and you know what I mean. Women oftentimes have that kind of level of commitment to their best friends, and then of course a ton of intimacy. Women share details and things that men would just be horrified by. Oftentimes, their husbands would die if they knew what these two women were talking about. So companionate love, I like to say, is possibly in romantic couples, but it could also be in best friendships. So I'm all yours, companionate love. Okay. Now, if you have commitment combined with passion, this would be called fatuous love. So these two, I'm making up little stories. These two met each other on the beach and they started chatting with each other, and then they liked each other better and better. They're like, oh, the chemistry is so perfect, and this is the greatest person ever. And they happen to be on vacation somewhere where you can have a whirlwind, get married kind of thing. And they think, I've found my perfect partner. I'm going to get married. We're going to get married, and we're going to go home, and we're going to start our lives. That's called fatuous love. Now, Sternberg said if your relationship starts out as fatuous love, then it's at risk, because with fatuous love, as you get to know each other through, as the intimacy grows, you may discover you actually don't have that much in common, or you don't really like each other that much. So he says this is sort of a dangerous game, to get swept away and may or may not really know this person in fatuous love. Romantic love is when you have intimacy and passion. And so this is, a couple who they know each other, they share things with each other, they've got the right chemistry. This is oftentimes what people experience when they're dating. They're just really, they can't stop talking to each other all the time. They just can't keep their hands off each other. Romantic love. Now, I forgot to put in consummate in the middle. Consummate love would be the combination of all three components. So when you have intimacy, passion, and commitment, then you have consummate love. And Sternberg says the goal is consummate love. And a lot of people who have this great romantic love on the day of their wedding, then they get married, so now they've got consummate love because all three components are present. They think, okay, and then that's the end of the story, and we're going to move on, and everything's, and they lived happily ever after. And he said that's the mistake that a lot of times couples make when they make that commitment, and then they forget that you have to work to keep the intimacy going and work to keep the passion alive, and that sometimes one will wane and the other will wane. You think about young couples with children in the house, and a lot of times their passion is waning because they're just so drained by the demands of work and home and kids and blah blah. But he says it's really important to work to make sure that you don't lose that, because it can become like a trap or a habit. Not talking to each other. One of the hardest times in my marriage was when my daughter was little, like 2 years old, and we were trying not to have to put her in daycare. So I was teaching classes in the morning and classes in the evening. So like I had class at 7:30 in the morning till 9. And then I had classes in the evening from 7 p.m. till 9. And then my husband was trying to work in the middle of that, and between those hours. And there were only 2 days out of the week when we couldn't balance it, and I would drop her off at a babysitter. But otherwise, he would come in and I'd be dressed with my briefcase and I'd be out the door. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're 5 minutes late. I got to get out of here. She just got fed, but she needs a bath. See you later. Bye, bye, bye. And then by the time I'd get home, they'd already be asleep. And there was no intimacy at that, in those few months that we were doing that. And we said, something has got to change. This is not how people can live. I mean, there's no way. She's doing fine. She has her parents with her all the time, but you and I aren't seeing each other at all. And that's kind of the trap that Sternberg got into. He forgot to share intimacy with his wife and ended up losing the marriage. So, got to work at this stuff. Just because you get married doesn't mean the intimacy and the passion will always continue to fall. So you have to work on it. Okay, so that's Sternberg's theory of love. Let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back in the next segment and talk about another theory of love.